In this chapter, Andy Schwartz, CEO of xtraCHEF, will share his perspectives on how real-time visibility into food costs and back-office automation can have a meaningful impact on your bottom line. Welcome, Andy. Look forward to our chat. So, one of the things, I think we'll just jump right into it. And so, we've had some prior discussions and talking about food cost as one of the biggest, controllable areas from a cost perspective in the restaurant. Yet when we talk about implementing tools to manage it, like it always comes with this kind of stigmatism of it's difficult, garbage in, garbage out, just, a lot of challenges around the deployment of these types of tools. Like, why do you think that's been the case?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So we've got a company called xtraCHEF, and we feel like we've been able to take a really unique view into how restaurants should be managing their food costs and their overall costs. And what we did is, we kind of came in with a fresh lens, right? So we came into the industry about 5 years ago with more of a business accounting background. And, we'll talk a little bit later about like the convergence of technology and how that has helped. But ultimately, I feel like there are now easier ways, more automated systems to help you manage your business. And what those systems do is they take a lot of the manual, repetitive work, the cumbersome work out of your day-to-day tasks and allow you to do a little bit more planning with your numbers and with your data, and actually take a step back and be able to see your data and how food costs affect the profitability of your restaurant. So I think in the older days, you spent a lot of time on managing and manipulating the costs and the data and taking inventory and setting up the system. And I think that's been stripped away. These systems have been better packaged. They're now cloud-based monthly subscription systems that have been proven. And now your task as an operator is to just kind of use the data that the system gives you to help you plan your days, your weeks, your months to get to profitability.
And so how do you think you talk about automation and repetitive tasks, right? And having a long time ago worked in restaurants and, the idea of the clipboard and taking inventory, everything did seem so manual and then prone to error to kind of transpose that into back when I was doing restaurants, a spreadsheet or sending it off to somebody else to figure it out. But even in the systems today, some of the legacy systems, like keying in that information, or managers tend to use their old way of doing things and then, then transport that data into another system. Like, where have you seen the biggest driver in the value of automation in that process?
Yeah, I think to answer that question, I'd like to take a step back, right? Because historically, whenever people talk about controlling food costs, everybody always starts with inventory, taking inventory. The biggest challenge with that is that you rely on humans to do a task repetitively. And if you have 50 restaurants, you really have to have like that process in order, take it on the same day, make sure it happens weekly or monthly. I like to start with the idea that there's a lot more savings in buying in a smarter fashion. So smart procurement, better budgeting and planning, understanding how ingredient fluctuation affects your profitability or your cost of goods. And then get back to the basics from an inventory perspective. And you and I had kind of discussed this before. Maybe you're just focused on some of your prime items from an inventory perspective. And that way you're getting rid of like counting every single item. Now, if we're going to talk about automation from accounting perspective, I do think that historically people liked the clipboard because you weren't going to bring your whole computer with the desktop into, the storage facility.
Or the freezer where it's not.
Yeah, exactly. And
freezer, right?
And there's no internet,
yeah.
Right? So one of the things that companies like us have done is everything that you could do on a computer, you could do on your mobile device. Almost easier on the phone to count. You can count in offline mode. So it doesn't, if the internet goes off while you're in the middle of doing it, it doesn't ruin your whole count. So I think technology companies have thought of the easiest way to count. I actually we're doing a little bit of research and development into like voice counting. Right? Just using speech recognition to go ahead and count. So just unpacking it a little bit, I would say, I think technology now allows restaurateurs, even one-unit restaurants, to look holistically at how to save money in the whole supply chain. and not just focus on counting inventory, counting inventory, counting inventory.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, and it like to our conversation, I remember some of the, the days when, at the end of an inventory cycle, or if the person that generally counts on that, food, and then they have on vacation, all of a sudden your numbers are going to fluctuate because they count, somebody else comes in and does a count. And again, it's just how people tend to count, or how you estimate. You talk about like liquor inventory. Well, maybe that's a third full of a bottle and somebody else sees it as a half, then you're chasing costs that are really not true, right?
It's a little subjective. It's a little subjective. I'll give you another one. We had some customers when they first started to implement our operations management solutions, which includes recipe and inventory and ordering. They did a good job of counting inventory, but at the end of the day, when we started to look at their numbers and kind of the estimated inventory dollar amount, it included ingredient level data from like 4 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago. And when you looked at what they bought tomatoes for this week versus 8 weeks ago, there was a 20% delta. So their 20% inventory costs on tomatoes were off, right? So because xtraCHEF leverages machine learning and OCR to cleanse the data that comes in, we're actually on a real-time basis updating that ingredient price in your inventory count, so that when you're counting, you're actually getting the real cost of your inventory, not stale data, the old cost of your inventory.
So maybe talk a little bit about OCR and what that means and where the value comes in, especially the connection between, in restaurant and then the accounting team, whether they sit within the restaurant or back at some corporate office, and where that kind of value add comes from that type of technology.
Yeah, I think, selfishly, I think this is one of the bigger innovations in this industry. When we came into the industry, people had maybe tried the old-fashioned template-based OCR to process invoices. And just to kind of give everyone, an understanding of what we're talking about here, we're talking about vendor invoices, right? So every restaurant has a supply chain. They're buying food products from distributors and vendors. The ingredient level data that you ordered is coming back to you on a piece of paper in most cases. Now that document, that invoice, has two real flows in an organization. There's an accounting workflow where that invoice needs to be approved, coded, data entered into an accounting system and paid. That same data, that ingredient level data, is the same data that flows into recipe builders, menu costs, inventory costs, right? And what we found was you had two separate teams physically working on that invoice to process that vendor data. So what and my background was in kind of this OCR machine learning, right? So we leverage optical character recognition to take those invoices that come in, whether it be EDI or paper invoices or emails or receipts, statements, whatever they are. You can literally take out your phone. You can snap a picture of the invoice. Of course, you can pile a pack of invoices into a scanner. Our technology is breaking down that entire invoice at an ingredient level, coding it, routing it around for approval, and basically providing all of the manual steps that you would do from the accounting workflow of processing the invoice. So workflow, approval routing, coding, pushing data into an accounting system, paying your vendor, all of those steps are now automated. We're also taking the tough stuff, the ingredient level detail. There might be 45 ingredients per invoice, 10 invoices a day, right? You're looking at 450 line items a day. No human can look at that and see that sugar has gone up, right? So now we're looking at all of those ingredients. We're looking at the fluctuation or volatility of your ingredients. And then we're pushing all of that new data into those different modules, recipe management, inventory, COGS, and it's adjusting on a daily basis. And then based on your real-time sales, we're giving you profitability, COGS, where are you from a budget perspective? So all of that data provides the outlook from a financial perspective on your restaurant in real time.
That's amazing. And I think, I read somewhere on your website that you're taking the chef out of the back office and putting them back in the kitchen, right? And when you look at the innovation that brings and the time savings and allowing people then to shift their focus of manually entering data to really analyze the business and really understand where they're at and where they can drive real results. That's the paradigm shift of data that everybody needs to get to, right?
That's the name, xtraCHEF, right? So actually how we thought of the name was when Bhavik and I started the company, we had a good friend and co-founder named Chaz Brown, who's a chef. And Chaz was basically like, hey, if I had an xtraCHEF, I would want that person to be a numbers person. And I would want that and I'll focus on the food, and I could just have an xtraCHEF that could just do all of my administrative food cost stuff. Because when I met him, or not when I met him, I've known him a long time, but when we started talking about this idea, he pulls out his laptop and he's got an Excel file with like 57 tabs below where he's got all of his menu items, and every day he's got his invoices and he's putting the ingredient prices in. And he was managing like an 8-location group in New York City. And it was just like, wow, this is the system you're using to run your restaurant? It just didn't make any sense to me.
So that brings up a good question that I want to ask you. If you did own a restaurant and you were implementing this type of, implementing a tool like an xtraCHEF, like what would be the 3 focus areas that you would go after first?
Yeah, so good question. I've fortunate enough, when I was growing up, my father was an entrepreneur. So I kind of grew up learning the keys to running a business. He had a software business. So for me, budgets are really, really key, right? Because I've always learned that like, if it matters, you measure it, right? So everything in the kitchen or everything in your restaurant needs to be measured, right? So that starts with an estimation or an understanding of what you think you might do in sales, right? And when you understand that, then you could do some research and identify like what your target food costs should be for these various cost of goods categories or these various items. And then I would work backwards, right? I would want to understand what my food costs need to be for me to run a profitable restaurant. I would build my menu so that, the items that I sold were profitable enough. Obviously, you have some items to get people in the door and there's less margin on them. But I would really focus on understanding my budget. So understanding the numbers and what I need to be successful. 2, I strongly believe that the biggest cost savings on the food side is around procurement and not around not around inventory and waste and spoilage. I do agree those are important, but I think if I could go from buying white meat chicken breast from $3.75 to $2.75, that's going to be that $1 that I save on every piece of chicken breast is going to be a bigger saver than taking inventory every single day and going crazy with it. So I would say 1, budgets, know the numbers. 2, the supply chain. So procurement, leveraging a tool like xtraCHEF to buy smarter. Maybe there's a different vendor I can get chicken from. Maybe I could use some economies of scale with other restaurants on my block to buy chicken, my cousin, et cetera, right? Those are things that I could do. And then I would look at where I have my team or myself or my family spending time and money on repetitive tasks. So, when I look at, the front of house, the back of house, like what am I doing manually that I could leverage technology to automate if it's a repetitive task? I know that technology can do that stuff really well and allow the creativity to be done by myself and my team to focus on the guest experience.
Thank you. Great advice. One of the things that I think also to add to that is, forecasting is really under leveraged, and some of the tools and technologies out there, and with the vast amount of data that we have access to, of creating a really strong forecast to drive not only your ordering, your staffing levels. Like, where do you see the shift of people starting to adopt more of kind of using logic and machine learning to help drive some of those forecasts as opposed to maybe gut feel by restaurants, right?
Yeah. So, so you and I spoke about this a little bit last time we spoke. I think that one of the challenges in the restaurant industry is some of the legacy technology players have been this sort of black box of data where maybe it's an old point of sale system and they've got your data and they don't really allow you to do a lot with it, right? The truth is you need a lot of different points of data to forecast things. So what I really like about like the new entrepreneurs in the technology space and hospitality is we've created this like ecosystem of like open APIs, right? So, you mentioned Jordan from 7 Shifts or Aman and Chris from Toast. Like, it's really easy to put our system in with their systems, leverage an API connection, and just have data, right? Labor and shift coming from 7 Shifts, all the sales POS information at a granular level coming from the POS, our expense data. And now when you're able to look at that data in one system, you could start to forecast. So I do believe that as you start to see more of these technologies tightly integrated, that tech stack, right? If you're Toast, 7 Shifts, xtraCHEF, and QuickBooks, right? If you're running your restaurant on that, all 4 of them are talking to each other, you're going to have the ability to do a lot of things that you wouldn't if those systems were all not speaking to each other.
Yeah, just the power of the consolidation of the data and really driving kind of information to drive true actions is going to have a significant impact on profitability. And again, it goes back to that paradigm shift of gathering all the data and trying to manipulate the data as opposed to leveraging the data to really, again, drive better results.
Kelly, we're in the process right now of finalizing this feature in the Toast ecosystem. So right now, we've got a really, really tight integration and relationship with Toast. So in real time, we're receiving menu level items from Toast with their PLU codes and everything. And that's kicking off a workflow in our system to match it to our recipes. So in any given moment, we could see that you sold a hamburger and French fries from Toast. You sold it for $10.95. Your cost today is $6.95. You made $4 or whatever, 80% on that item. Now, what we're actually doing with Toast now is we're bringing in modifiers in real time as well. So did you put onions on it? Was it American cheese? If it's a pizza, was there pepperoni on it? So now within minutes, you're going to be able to tell at an actual, menu item level, hamburger with French fries, with onions and a Coke. What did I make on that item? And now it's going to get deducted from inventory. And I know when I get down to like 10 hamburger patties, I'm going to need to reorder. And I know these vendors that I should buy them from. So that whole process, if the data is connecting and the technologies are connecting, you should be able to have that type of automation in your restaurant.
That's amazing. And again, it goes back to having an extra chef in the kitchen and, managers on the floor servicing the guests, not trying to bring all this information together. So it's really refreshing, exciting. So I really appreciate that insight on that. My last question, because it's always good, is, what do you see? We talked about it a little bit, but like, what do you think when you see consistently going into restaurants, the number one low hanging fruit? Like, what's the one thing that's going to have the biggest impact? I know you talked about the 3 earlier, but kind of breaking it down into one piece of advice for everybody, what would it be?
Yeah, I got to go 2 here.
Okay.
I got to go 2.
Maybe 2.
Yeah, I got to go 2. So I was brought up and come from the automation industry, right? So I used to go into Fortune 1000 companies and see manual data-driven workflows that you could use technology to streamline. So my number 1 would be if there are any data or document processes that come into your organization, like statements, like invoices, purchase orders, like all of these things that you're sending in or sending out that involve data, put a system in place, identify the repetitive nature of it, make sure the system can handle it, and then never look at it again. Never have to code a vendor invoice again. Never have to call a vendor for credit because now you have it all documented. Don't have to call your vendor if you don't want to order hamburgers. Just send over the purchase order, right? So I would say automating any manual, cumbersome tasks. And then I would say understand the power of negotiation in procurement, right? So you've got a lot of different vendors in your geographic area that sell different food items. Understand what you're currently buying those big ticket items for, even the smaller ones, right? Using technology. Understand the ecosystem of maybe what other vendors are selling those same goods at different prices, which you could find out in xtraCHEF. And then start to negotiate with that vendor on the things that you need. Because ultimately, if your restaurant isn't profitable, that vendor's not going to be selling to you anymore. So it's in their best interest for you to make money on a hamburger and French fries. And if you're not able to do that because you're paying too much for meat, or you're not properly identifying how much you need at the time, I would say you got to use systems to understand that. So those two things to me, in my world, in the back of house world, I think are really valuable in running one restaurant to 200 restaurants.
No, great advice. Yeah. And I think, you know, I don't really see vendors proactively coming to you telling you that they're going to reduce your price. So being armed with the data and the information and being proactive about it is definitely the approach. I think everybody should revisit those costs, or, the negotiated price on a very frequent basis. Andy, so great speaking to you today. If people want to get in touch with xtraCHEF, what's the best way to do it?
Yeah, you just go to our website, www.xtraCHEF.com, xtraCHEF with an X. And there's a button right on the homepage that says request a demo. There's a lot of information on our website about what we do, which customers use us. I would urge people that are looking at technology to go with like a proven piece of technology that's been there before, that's worked with restaurants, your shape and size and your segment. We're fortunate enough where we're 5 years in now, and we've got thousands and thousands of restaurants using our technology. So there's really nothing we haven't seen before. And make sure that it's open and integrates, right? So if you're using a point of sale system, ask if it integrates with your point of sale. If you're using an accounting system, ask if it integrates with your accounting system, and start to work with the providers that have kind of rolled up their sleeves and really gotten into this marketplace and stand by it.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate your time.
All right. Thank you.